Welcome to Wild Side, your wild true crime podcast.
We're your hosts, who are sisters, storytellers, and truth seekers.
I'm Bailey, a therapist who is fascinated by all weird and dark human behaviors.
And I'm Chelsea, an educator here to unearth the facts behind the cases.
We cover true crime because some cases are just too dark to forget,
and others are too wild to ignore.
We're so glad you're here, so buckle up
and enjoy the ride.
Welcome back to our dumpster fire.
It's not a dumpster fire, but I hope that your Valentine's Day was not a dumpster fire.
No, it was super good.
To all of y'all who are coming off of Valentine's Day, I hope all your dreams came true.
Yeah. And my voice is starting to get better. It's still a little gravelly, but we're on the up and up. And this week, you guys, Chelsea and I are bringing a really, really heavy case to you. I haven't really heard a whole lot of coverage on it. I stumbled across it and sent it to Chelsea, and she was just like, whatever, like, this is crazy. And so just as kind of a thought-provoking question or statement to get into this one, possibly two-parter episode, my question for you, dear listeners, is I want you to think about how close you might be to a predator and not know it. Maybe you're married to one. Maybe you work with one. Maybe you live next door to one, and you would never know.
Yeah. We had an individual that popped up in the news today locally, and he and I guess a partner of his, a business partner, they just opened a business here in town that's kind of this like hangout place, comic book store. Maybe there's a pool table in there. You know what I mean? Like, you can go in there and play games, or you can Dungeons and Dragons it up. And just came out that he was arrested for online solicitation of minors.
Yeah. Well, that is going to pretty much mirror what we're going to be talking about. And we're going to start getting into the world of child pornography and child exploitation and how this stuff really lives in the shadows. And I think the scariest part of this case for me, like what I took away from it, is how you just never know. Like, you can't stereotype somebody into being like, oh, they're definitely into like that really dark stuff, because a lot of times, like, when these arrests, make the news, all the comments are like, I know this guy, or I worked with him, or I had no idea. And that's going to be a central theme throughout this case.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, again, in a trending mindset, if you will, all of the most well-known, notorious serial killers were people like Bundy, right? Handsome, charismatic, had a totally normal life, seemingly, quote unquote, seemingly. So it does. It always makes you wonder, what is in that proverbial lockbox in the closet?
Yeah. And this case all starts with an arrest. A quiet suburban home, a normal neighborhood just outside of Atlanta. And the suspect, well, he was a father, an assistant principal at a local high school. How terrifying is that? But he wasn't just any suspect. He was the first domino in what would become one of the largest global child sexual exploitation takedowns in history.
And this wasn't your everyday, ordinary arrest. It wasn't just another case online of misconduct, right? That blip in the news. No. What started as a seemingly small connection unraveled into something so much darker and pretty much took everybody by surprise. And at the heart of it all, does anybody want to guess? A single unassuming website buried deep into the dark web known only as Welcome to Video.
Now I want you to picture this: an invisible world beneath the surface where faceless people move in the shadows, hidden behind their encrypted screens and anonymous wallets. They aren't monsters in the way we would like to imagine them. There aren't cloaks or sinister grins or crazy face paint. They're ordinary citizens, teachers, doctors, fathers. They tuck their kids into bed at night and then retreat back into their secret world, their screens, feeding a marketplace full of human suffering. This is a digital underworld where the worst things that happen come to light, are bought and sold like commodities, and paid for in untraceable currency. Sounds like a total nightmare, but it's absolutely real, and it's happening all the time. And it's really terrifying because it challenges everything that we think we know about crime. We tend to imagine predators as lone wolves, but when these predators find a space that lets them do their worst without any sort of consequence, it becomes a network of monsters, of everyday civilian people doing monstrosities. But the question is, how did we get here? How did a tool that was designed for privacy and protection become the foundation for a hidden world of unspeakable crimes? And the answer to that actually lies in the technology itself. The rise of the dark web marketplaces all started, believe it or not, with the creation of what's called the Tor, and that stands for the Onion Router Tor. It was a software that was developed in the 90s by none other than U.S. Naval Research Lab to protect online anonymity. Now, what the Tor does is it enables users to access hidden services, websites that is not indexed by search engines like Google or Ask Jeeves. Initially developed to protect anonymity, it unintentionally created this breeding ground for gross, illicit, perverted activities. And this was the beginning of the dark web and the rise of digital black markets.
Now, once the door to the dark web had been opened, there really was no closing it, right? Pandora's box, if you will. Hidden marketplaces began to emerge, each more brazen than the last. Then, in 2011, Silk Road appeared, a digital black market that operated like Amazon, but instead of selling household goods and electronics, it trafficked in drugs, weapons, and fill in the blank, right? Unthinkable depravity. The FBI took it down in 2013, arresting its creator, Ross Ulbricht. But as with all things in the shadows, when one monster falls, another rises to take its place. The dark web quickly evolved into bigger, more dangerous markets like Alphabay and Hansa, which were sites that had grown into hubs for illegal narcotics, weapons, stolen data, and, you guessed it, child sexual abuse material, or CSAM, which is basically a, quote, child pornography, but formally referred to as, again, child sexual abuse material, or CSAM. Unfortunately, CSAM has been a major problem on the dark web, a hidden part of the internet used by criminals. So these sites lurk in the darkest corners of the internet, shielded by layers of encryption and anonymity softwares like Tor, which we talked about. Here, identities dissolve into strings of code, and criminals operate with a dangerous sense of invincibility. It's a marketplace where morals, ethics, and even the law really hold no weight. Only demand and supply dictate the trade. The faceless predators thrive in these shadows, emboldened by their supposed untouchability. Transactions are seamless, hidden behind untraceable cryptocurrencies like Monero, drawing in thousands across the globe. People from all walks of life, unified by their darkest impulses. And as law enforcement struggled to keep pace, these marketplaces evolved, growing more sophisticated, more elusive. But no matter how deep they buried themselves, they could not stay hidden forever. The relentless pursuit of justice was about to unearth the largest CSAM ring in history, one that would shake the world to its ever loving core.
The problem is, it's kind of like scooping out water in a sinking car. Even as law enforcement fought to dismantle these networks, like Chelsea was saying, the dark web adapted. It grew even more sophisticated, even more elusive. Encrypted transactions, decentralized hosting, and privacy focused cryptocurrencies made these marketplaces harder to trace. It seemed like a never ending game of cat and mouse until 2017. And this is when the National Crime Agency, or the NCA, which is like Britain's version of our FBI, they uncovered one of the most chilling cases to date. This wasn't just another faceless predator hiding behind a screen. This time, the predator was hiding in plain sight, and his name was Matthew Falder. He was a respected academic from Manchester, appearing to be an upstanding professional. But behind closed doors, he was anything but. Beneath his polished exterior was a really dangerous, manipulative predator who orchestrated horrors from behind his computer screen while the rest of the world only saw his credentials and upstanding reputation. And then, as most of them do, he gets out of control. He began to pick his victims carefully, usually people who were vulnerable, and then he broke them, not just through abuse, but through psychological warfare. He would blackmail them, manipulate them, and make sure that they felt completely trapped. And once he had them, he would unleash a campaign of blackmail, forcing these individuals into degrading or harmful acts on camera. Some were even coerced into harming themselves or others. Even when the actual abuse was over, Falder's victims weren't free because he made damn sure that they believed there was no way out for them. He had built his crimes around deception, posing as a female artist online to manipulate these victims into sending nude photos. And by the time authorities caught up with him, he had exploited over 50 victims, 3 of whom had actually attempted suicide because of the blackmail and the psychological backlash of his acts. Now, one thing just to note is psychologically, Falder was a pretty terrifying person because of how methodical he was. He didn't just exploit these individuals, he controlled them.
And I think, arguably, the scariest part was, again, he wasn't some creepy loner, mouth breathing individual lurking in his mom's basement. No offense. I mean, he was a respected dude. He is a respected citizen of the community. I'm sure rubbed elbows with you at the grocery store. Smart, charming, well-spoken, the kind of guy, I mean, really, I mean, you would trust him, right? Without any thought.
It's true. I've worked with individuals who their primary acting out behaviors is child pornography. And it's the stereotype I think is pretty ingrained in society. We think of these like old gross dudes, like blowing Cheeto dust off their fingers, before they go to type in their basement with like 84 cans of Mountain Dew around them. But that's not usually the case.
No, and it makes us also kind of pause and think, why do we have that image, right? Is it literally just like our entertainment world, our TV, our medias that always portray them as such? And do we need to start realigning what predators actually look like?
Yeah. And I think that's the biggest thing is we subconsciously or consciously, we expect monsters to look like monsters, quote unquote. But the worst ones is what makes them so hard to catch. And that's that they blend in. right? They have careers that are respectable most of the time. They shake hands, tuck their kids into bed at night, and then have this totally secret double life. And this is why this case into Falder, it shook investigators so much, because if someone like him, who was so upstanding and so normal, could hide in plain sight for so long, how many more were out there that were like him? So, as the NCA dug deeper into his life, they uncovered something even more interesting, but it was just the tip entrance to this dark black hole. What they found was it wasn't just a predator who had hidden behind his facade, but something a lot darker. And it was something that made his actions look almost insignificant by comparison. Falder, as it turns out, was a registered user of a website called Welcome to Video. Unlike most dark web marketplaces that relied on complex laundering methods, Welcome to Video was a little bit different. It was definitely more brazen, and with that brought a whole nother layer of disgust. It operated as one of the rare platforms that openly sold child sexual abuse material, or CSAM. And with an ever-expanding horrific library of content, Welcome to Video had drawn a vast international network of users, not just from one country or two countries, but literally from all over the globe. These sites are built to be untraceable, designed to operate in the shadows. It is the digital black market, after all, an unthinkable world where this anonymity reigns. But as with any criminal empire, there's often a flaw, and thank goodness there is. And in this hideous underground operation, the flaw came down to one word. The Achilles heel is known only as Bitcoin.
Bitcoin's promise of secrecy and decentralization made it the perfect currency for a digital underground world. When it was first introduced in 2008, it was hailed as a financial revolution, an untraceable way to exchange value, free from the oversight of traditional banks. Even Satoshi Nakamoto, Bitcoin's enigmatic creator, emphasized the potential for this secrecy, stating that, quote, participants can be anonymous. And it didn't take long for the dark web to take notice. Marketplaces like Silk Road quickly adopted Bitcoin as the preferred method of payment for drugs, weapons, and other illegal trades, fueling the rise of a shadowy digital economy. For years, law enforcement had struggled to penetrate the dark web, but something called chain analysis had changed the game. Chain analysis, it's like following a trail of digital money. It helps track where and how funds move across the internet, especially with cryptocurrencies. Investigators can see who is sending the money to whom, which is useful for finding criminals or suspicious activities. I mean, right. But here's the twist. Bitcoin had a fatal flaw that turned out to be our greatest weapon. Every transaction is permanently recorded on something called the blockchain. Okay, I know we're using lots of techie words, but a blockchain is essentially a public ledger. And unlike traditional financial systems, it's transparent, unchangeable, and impossible to alter. Kind of carved in stone, if you will. While this prevents counterfeiting, it also means that every transaction is visible to anyone who knows where to look to see where someone has been, but in the world of online transactions. Criminals believed Bitcoin was anonymous, but in reality, each transaction became a piece of evidence in the hunt, like tracks in fresh snow. By using a technique called a peel chain, officials could track Bitcoin as it moved from one address to another, much like following a stack of bills being spent in small increments. These methods had already helped the FBI, DEA, and IRS crack major cases, from recovering stolen funds from Silk Road to identifying the mastermind behind some of the largest dark web operations. And now this was the key: the tracks in the snow that the UK's National Crime Agency would follow to find the shabby shack deep in the internet woods known as Welcome to Video. With those Bitcoin footprints in hand, the NCA quickly realized they'd need more than just the child exploitation team to catch the criminals behind Welcome to Video. They had to hand the case off to the experts, cybercrime specialists. These tech-savvy agents would become the online hunters following the digital trail of breadcrumbs left behind by the illicit transactions.
And that is really where this case takes a critical turn, landing in the hands of an NCA agent who happened to be working closely with someone who was about to become the key player in cracking it wide open. And that is a man by the name of Jonathan Levin. Levin wasn't just a tech guy, he was a tech guru. He was the co-founder of Chainalysis, the world's first cryptocurrency tracing firm. He is a true pioneer in the field. If anyone in the world could have a shot at tracing these online predators operating in the shadows, it would be Levin and his company. Levin was, as always, on the outlook for Chainalysis's next big investigation. So, on this stroke of luck, when the NCA agent mentioned this massive, ominous dark web site that had recently come onto their radar, Levin was immediately intrigued. This was right up his alley. After being handed the Bitcoin addresses, which are just long strings of letters and numbers that are unique, kind of like a fingerprint, once he was handed these Bitcoin addresses that linked to the site, Levin and his Chainalysis software began tracing the transactions. And what he found was unbelievable. He found that the users funding Welcome to Video had made almost no effort to hide their activity. Now, this was really unusual because criminals typically employ multiple Bitcoin addresses or specialized laundering services to better obscure their payments so they can't be traced. But in this case, buyers had sent Bitcoin directly from their wallets to the site, which left a breadcrumb trail that Chelsea was talking about that was very, very easy to follow. Levin got to work and began mapping out the massive web of transactions. Purchases that led to various cryptocurrency exchanges where users were converting their Bitcoin into traditional currency. And with this data, there was now a clear path to identifying not only the site's administrators, but also the purchasers, the users who purchased and distributed child sexual abuse material. It was a staggering breakthrough. These criminals had operated under the illusion that Bitcoin was untraceable, when in reality, financial forensics had turned it into a trap.
Welcome to Video was unlike anything Levin had seen before. It had the potential to expose a vast global network of abusers. He found that the website's cryptocurrency funds were cashed out through platforms in South Korea and China. These exchanges allowed the digital currency to be converted back into traditional money, making it usable in the real world. Someone kept making large transactions, combining multiple sources of money from the site and cashing it out. This pattern made it easy for Reactor, a blockchain analysis tool, to automatically connect thousands of cryptocurrency addresses to a single entity. Levin was then able to label this entity into the software as Welcome to Video, confirming its financial activity and linking it to the illegal marketplace. Levin realized that the cryptocurrency exchanges connected to the site's transactions likely held key data that could unmask many users. He could track not just who was withdrawing Bitcoin from the site, but also who was purchasing Bitcoin to spend on it. These blockchain links provided some of the clearest evidence he had ever seen, directly connecting buyers and sellers in a way that made their illegal activities traceable. I mean, talk about a breakthrough. Levin noticed that most of Welcome to Video's money was being withdrawn through two South Korean cryptocurrency exchanges, suggesting the site's administrators were likely based there in South Korea. Many users, meanwhile, were funding the site directly from accounts on US-based platforms like Coinbase. This meant that law enforcement in either the US or South Korea could request user information from those exchanges to identify buyers and sellers. Levin had a solid lead now, but he knew he couldn't bring down this sprawling operation on his own. To connect all the dots, he needed the right law enforcement muscle, agents with the expertise to navigate the murky world of cryptocurrency crime. That's where Chris Janczewski and Tigran Gambarian, two special agents from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, stepped into the picture. These two were no strangers to following the money trail, and their expertise would be crucial in bringing this global child exploitation network to its knees.
Now, all of this stuff is kind of happening very quickly at the same time. For the sake of understanding the timeline, all of this is happening in July of 2017. So in the UK, you have Jonathan Levin with his cryptocurrency firm and the NCA working together to figure out this Welcome to Video. On the other side of the world, you have Janczewski and Gambarian, who are sitting in an airport in Bangkok, having just been sidelined from the biggest dark web market takedown at that time, which was known as Alpha Bay. Despite their expertise and experience in tracing cryptocurrency, they were excluded from the operation. According to the Wired article by Andy Greenberg, and I have to give a huge shout out to him because this is where I got most of my information from, the beautiful work that he did in this article. So according to this article by Andy Greenberg, for Gambarian and Janczewski, this was really typical. The IRS criminal investigation agents did shoe leather detective work, carried guns, made arrests, just like their FBI and DEA counterparts. But because of the IRS's dowdy public image, they often found that most agents treated them like accountants. They'd always say things like, "Don't audit me," and they would joke about them being pretty tight-laced, and most people aren't big fans of the IRS, let's be real. But despite being two of the most adept cryptocurrency tracers within the US government, there they were sitting in the Bangkok airport, missing out on all the action. Now, this is where things get really fortuitous and tend to align. Since their flight was delayed, they had nothing but hours to kill, so Gambarian decided to make use of his time. He decided that he was going to call his buddy, Jonathan Levin, to see if he had any upcoming cases of interest. When he got in touch with Levin, Levin had a surprising lead to share with them. He says, "Hey, I've been looking into a site that's way outside of the IRS's typical wheelhouse, but one that he believed was worth their attention." This was, of course, Welcome to Video. At first, Gambarian and Janczewski were skeptical. This wasn't the kind of case the IRS usually tackled. These crimes were typically under the jurisdiction of the FBI or Homeland Security Investigations.
Moral of this story number 1, networking and making friends is always a good thing. Because without that network, without those friends, Levin and Gambarian probably wouldn't have had this phone call. The thing is, child sexual abuse material had always been hard to pin down financially. often circulating like it's kind of like baseball trading cards, if you will. And it was always just out of the IRS's radar. But this welcome to video was different. It left behind a financial trail, one that was traceable and, more importantly, impossible to ignore. As Gambarian and Januszewski mulled over Levin's findings, they realized they had something that was too good to ignore. When they returned to DC, they wasted no time bringing in Aaron Bice, a technical analyst with expertise in blockchain forensics. Together, they dug into Welcome to Video, and what they uncovered was a precise and traceable network of Bitcoin addresses linked to identifiable exchanges, everything they needed to build a case. The financial activity was so clear and direct that this was going to be a surefire investigation. But before they could move forward, they needed the green light from the higher ups. The power team, Gambarian, Januszewski, and Bice, quickly brought the case to federal prosecutors and seasoned assistant U.S. Attorney Zia Faruqi. Faruqi, who focused on money laundering cases, saw no reason why they couldn't approach Welcome to Video as fundamentally a financial investigation. The problem was that none of these four had ever worked in child sexual exploitation cases. They had no training in handling images and videos of child abuse. They had never seen the likes of this disturbing material, and they really didn't have the emotional or psychological training or preparations for the graphic nature of what they were about to be exposed to. Despite this, none were deterred. Faruqi approved and finally opened an investigation into Welcome to Video, noting that they were going to investigate this by following the money.
Now, I know that this has kind of been all over the place, but basically what has happened is this huge underground child sexual abuse exploitation ring was found. But the only way to trace it was through the Bitcoin, is through the finances. And that's why the IRS takes lead in this case. The mentality is if we approach it with the money, if we follow the money, that will give us what we need to take down these other users of this website. And so, all steam ahead with Faruqi's approval, the investigation was officially underway and there was no turning back for anybody involved. The focus here at this point was very clear. Like I said, we follow the money, we trace every transaction, and uncover who is behind it. It was time for Januszewski and Gambarian to dive deep into the dark web. When they first entered the cumbersome web address, which I'm not going to put it in here, but when they put the address into their Tor browsers, remember this is like the super anonymous browser, they found themselves staring at a very simple page with the words "Welcome to Video" flashed across the screen, accompanied only by a login prompt. Januszewski couldn't help but compare its stark simplicity to things like the Google homepage, except this wasn't the clean, familiar interface of the internet's everyday world. This was the entrance into this really dark, gross, underground thing. They each created a username and password to access the site. After the simple greetings page, the site revealed a vast, seemingly endless collection of videos, titles, and thumbnails arranged in grids of 4 still images per video, likely selected automatically from the frames of the files. Those small images were a catalog of horrors. It was scene after scene after scene of children being sexually abused and raped. The agents had mentally prepared themselves to view the images, but nothing could really prepare them for the reality. Januszewski recalls the numbing shock he felt just from seeing the thumbnails before he even got to viewing the videos. He talks about how his mind almost refused to process what it was witnessing. But something interesting that will come into play a little bit later is he noticed that the site's search page was spelled incorrectly at the top. So instead of search videos, it was Serach videos, Serach. Below the search field, it listed popular keywords users had entered. The most popular was an abbreviation for 1-year-old. The second most popular was an abbreviation for 2-year-old. Januszewski was in shock, absolutely dumbfounded. He was asking himself if this was really a thing, assuring himself that surely this is not. He had expected to see recordings involving teenagers or preteens. But as Januszewski continued scrolling, the horror of what lay before him became impossible to ignore. Videos of the most grotesque abuse, toddlers, even infants, flooded the site. His stomach twisted in disbelief, each click revealing a new level of depravity that he never thought was even possible.
Yeah, when Bailey had sent this case over to me, and we had kind of talked about the fact that we were going to be covering this case, I have to admit that's where my brain went to as well. Like, okay, they're going to find this site. It's going to be 8-year-olds, 13-year-olds. But when we get to this piece where it's like they're literally the number one search topic is 1-year-old, I just can't imagine being in his shoes and going through that site in real time. So, despite the horrific imagery that they encountered, there was a small bit of relief. The agents didn't have to watch the videos, or at least not yet. The site required users to send Bitcoins to a specific address to purchase what they called points, right? That could be exchanged for a download. Since Januszewski and Gambarian weren't undercover agents, they didn't have the clearance to make those purchases. And I mean, frankly, they weren't eager to either. As they continued their examination of the site, they spotted something, disturbing, right, at the bottom of several pages. A copyright date of March 13th, 2015. Welcome to Video had been up and running for over 2 years. And it was already one of the largest collections of CSAM that law enforcement had ever encountered. The more they dug into the site's operations, the worse it got. Users could earn points not just by purchasing them, but by uploading videos themselves. The more often those videos were downloaded, the more points the uploaders received. The site's upload page even banned adult pornography, making it clear that only new content featuring children, was welcome. This seemed like a blatant attempt to encourage further abuse. What disturbed Gambarian the most, though, was the site's chat page. It was filled with comments in multiple languages, proving the site's global reach. And the tone of the posts were, honestly, they were just casual, almost like something you'd find on a mainstream platform like YouTube. Having worked on countless criminal cases over the years, Gambarian was used to understanding his targets. Sometimes he even sympathized with them. He had encountered drug dealers with more redeeming qualities than some white-collar criminals. Gambarian had experienced a troubled childhood in war-torn Armenia and post-Soviet Russia, and a career investigating various criminal activities. Believed he had seen the worst of humanity. But this case, this one left him shaken. The motivations of the people behind the site were unfathomable to him. The horrifying content exposed a level of atrocity that was beyond his understanding, stripping away his idealism.
Once Gambarian and Janzuski grasped the sheer magnitude of the site's purpose, they realized the urgency of the case. Each day that this site remained active, it facilitated more and more child abuse, escalating the need for immediate action. Therefore, Gambarian and Janzuski focused their investigation on the blockchain. That was the best point for them to start. They found that these welcome to video users could only send payments to a set address to buy credits. There was no customer service, no refunds. So this meant that all the money flowing out, over $300,000 of Bitcoin, likely went straight to the site's administrators. Gambarian reached out to his contacts in the Bitcoin community asking if they knew who might be acquainted with executives at the two Korean exchanges where most of the Welcome to Videos money was cashed out. And what ended up happening is that Gambarian found that the mere mention of child exploitation seemed to evaporate the cryptocurrency industry's usual resistance to government intervention. So basically, what Gambarian found was pretty much everybody drew the line at child pornography. So when he would say, this is what we're investigating, even these other places that would usually be resistant to any sort of government investigations, when they found out that there's child pornography, that's when people usually got on board, which is nice to say it's maybe the good part of humanity,
I was
right?
going to say, it's almost like a universal code.
Right, right. And rightfully so, as it should be. So even before he sent a formal legal request or subpoena, staff at all three exchanges were actually lined up and ready to help give him whatever information they needed to.
And now here we are, tiptoeing closer to the climax. While investigating Welcome to Video, Gambarian took a simple security step by viewing the site's raw HTML. There, he unexpectedly found an IP address linked to every thumbnail image. He traced the IP and discovered it was unprotected by Tor's anonymizing network. The server was hosted on a residential connection in South Korea. Soon after, Janzuski received an email identifying the suspected administrator, confirming the location. As he looked at the picture, Janzuski noticed something was off. The man in the photo appeared more like a farm worker, actually, than a dark web operator, someone expected to be running a site like Welcome to Video. After lucking out with one Korean exchange, Gambarian received the documents on the men who controlled Welcome to Video's cash-out addresses. But what was surprising is that the documents named two people, one being the middle-aged man who looked more like a hard laborer, and another, much younger male, 21-year-old, named Son Jong Woo. The two men listed the same address and shared the same family name, potentially father and son. At this point, multiple agencies were involved, and they were confident that they had their sites fixed correctly on the site's creator, Son Jong Woo, a computer science student living in a modest, rundown apartment in Seoul, a guy who blended into society without a second glance. No high-tech security, no underground criminal syndicate, just some 21-year-old dude living alone.
And I have to say that psychologically, this component is fascinating to me. Son didn't fit the typical profile of an offender, right? There was no childhood trauma of importance to note. There was no previous crimes. He wasn't a predator himself with no charges. He was this thin, nondescript, young Korean man, and he was described as having wide set eyes and a mop of black hair. They compared it to the Beatles mop of black hair. He wasn't a trafficker. He wasn't a hardened criminal. He was just a young man running a business of human suffering, right? It's just there's something really chilling about that, right? It's a complete detachment from the horror that he was facilitating. I mean, there was no remorse or no hesitation. I mean, there can't be when you're operating a system like that. It was a system designed for profit. He knew exactly what system he was into, what he was doing, and kept on year after year after year, cashing out all that Bitcoin, watching hundreds, if not thousands, of videos of little kids being abused.
Yeah. And I think, again, it makes us beg the question, what do predators look like? And why do we allow popular media to form that picture for us, right? A search warrant was obtained for Sun Jong Woo's Gmail accounts and numerous exchange records. What the warrants revealed was that he appeared to be the sole administrator. His father was not involved. In reality, Sun Jong Woo had stolen his father's identity to create these cryptocurrency accounts. This was their guy. They were sure of it. But even though the investigation had unmasked the Welcome to Videos administrators, the team realized arresting them wouldn't solve the larger issue. There was still a vast network of abusers globally tied to this site. And like we had talked about earlier, in these rings, a lot of times when one falls, when a leader falls, another one rises. What is that? What is that mythical creature when you cut the head off of one to come out?
I don't know, but I know what you're talking about.
I'm getting those vibes, right? Like you cut one head off and you're probably going to get two more.
Yeah. My brain automatically goes to the Harry Potter movie when they break into Bellatrix Lestrange's vault. And it's the, I don't remember the charm, but basically like the Engorgio or whatever, and you touch one and the cups multiply,
Right.
right? Like it just keeps popping in. And it
Yeah.
was important for them to cut the head off the snake, right? If you will. And can I just say how, I mean, there's definitely more emotions to this. I'd be so pissed if my child stole my identity to start literally the biggest dark web child abuse exploitation website like in the history of modern internet. Could you imagine being that person?
No, I'm just
No.
going to say no. No, I cannot.
No, I cannot. Prosecutors, including Lindsay Suttenberg, emphasized again the urgency of rescuing victims over taking the server offline, right? We need to figure out who these predators are. We need to find their victims. We need to take care of them before we just pull the plug to the website. So the team would need to follow the money, not just to these web administrators in Korea, but also the hundreds of active abusers and their complicit audience of enablers around the entire globe. Despite uncovering the likely location of Welcome to Videos administrators, Levin and the IRS team eventually hit a wall. They lacked the resources to arrest what could be hundreds of the site's users. The other barrier was the lack of jurisdictional reach to move forward, especially when it came to working with South Korean authorities to make arrests. And so that's when prosecutor Zia Faruqi suggested bringing in Homeland Security investigators, specifically Agent Thomas Tamsey from Colorado Springs. Now, Faruqi had worked with Tamsey before on a North Korean arms trafficking case and knew that Tamsey had built strong relationships with the Korean National Police. Tamsey's rapport would be absolutely critical in getting the cooperation from South Korea that they needed to take this website down. So fast forward a few months, it's now the fall of 2017. HSI agent Tamsey and another undercover HSI agent launched a covert operation in order to gather more evidence against the site. They set up at a DC hotel conference room, and they did that to mask the agents' identities. So just in case any of the users of Welcome to Video could figure it out and try to track them despite using Tor protection. They didn't want to do it in a government building, so they chose a hotel. The other part of the method to the madness is that when it came time to prosecute those affiliated with the ring, if they did it there in the DC hotel, then the DC attorney's office would be given jurisdiction. So to jumpstart the undercover operation, the agents began by purchasing Bitcoin. And this is where the graphic stuff starts to take place. Now they had to start downloading videos from Welcome to Video. Once the undercover agents finished their work, the files were then handed over to Januszewski, who, alongside attorney Lindsay Suttenberg, they would spend the coming weeks reviewing and cataloging every video, searching for clues to identify the perpetrators. To put it lightly, it was really awful, grim work.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you reminded us of that finance freeze, because up until this point, they had seen just like the cover of the book. They didn't have purchasing power. So,
Yeah, they're going to have to start watching the videos, right? Because if we prosecute this, we have to have details from it.
right.
And just think of, I just can't, and we're going to get there, you guys, but I can't even imagine, like I've gotten secondhand trauma from doing trauma work with people with really awful experiences. And I could not imagine being a trauma therapist working with, let's say, Agent Chris Januszewski, who who I'm the only person that maybe he could go into detail of these horrific crimes that keep him up at night, that give him nightmares, that play over and over and over in his head. And then like I have to hear it too, right?
Right.
Like it's just this, it just propagates this trauma and this, just this disgusting stuff.
And this cataloging, like it's not you looking at something going, oh my gosh, that's awful, and throwing it to the side, like just shoving it over to the corner. That's like, okay, this was really bad. This was a 1-year-old. This is going in this file. This was a 1-year-old with this type of whatever additive. And that's, you know what I mean? Like you're literally having to detail, you're having to process this
When,
in detail and catalog it. And that I think is just another level of can you imagine, right?
oh no, I couldn't.
And so they are meticulously cataloging any clues they can find about individuals. They're scanning from top to bottom of these images and of these videos, all while absorbing enough images of child abuse to haunt anyone's nightmare for the rest of their lives. As the lead agent on the case, Januszewski was responsible for drafting an affidavit that would eventually be used in the charging documents for court. To do this, like we said, it required Januszewski having to watch dozens of videos identifying the most egregious content on the site, and then writing detailed descriptions for a jury or judge. The experience took a psychological toll. Januszewski later admitted that watching those videos had changed him permanently. He likened the experience to a scene from A Clockwork Orange, an endless montage that he constantly wanted to look away from, but was compelled to watch. And for those of you who have not seen Clockwork Orange, essentially the subject in this experiment has his eyes essentially pinned open so that no matter what he does, he can't look away from the images, he can't shut his eyes. And that's essentially what Januszewski is put into. According to Andy Greenberg's article, Januszewski says watching those videos altered him, though in a way he could only describe in the abstract, ways even he's not sure he fully understands. There's no going back, Januszewski says vaguely. Once you know what you know, you can't unknow it. And everything that you see in the future comes in through that prism of what you now know.
But as Janzuski sat there, staring at the screen, the enormity of what they were about to uncover began to sink in. Every clue they found seemed to lead to a deeper, darker network, one that was more sophisticated and far-reaching than anyone had ever imagined. And just when they thought they had it all under control, an unexpected lead surfaced, a name, a connection, something that could change the course of the investigation. What came next would take them across borders, through mountains of encrypted data, and deep into a hidden network of offenders, many of whom had no idea just how close they were to being exposed. With the team now in possession of crucial information, they began to piece together a puzzle that spanned continents, uncovering a global web of child abuse and exploitation. And this is where the story intensifies, but unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it here because the next half we're going to dive into the takedown. And you guys don't want to miss it because we're going to name names. We have a whole list of the people, and yup, we're going to organize it by state, and we're going to give you guys all of the names of the people busted. That's public record for us to have access to. It's going to be a lot, just like this episode was a lot. So, Chelsea, do you have any parting thoughts?
What's crazy to me that I've been thinking is Janzuski's reaction, right? Where he's like, everything is now filtered through this prism of what I saw and I can never unsee it. And the fact that there were users who are just like, yeah, I click on there, I look at some really graphic, nasty, violating child porn, tuck my kids into bed, go to sleep, get up, have a snack. You know what I mean? Like, what separates those of us who are like, this is horrifying, to those of us who are like, I mean, it's a business, right? People got to feed their families.
Yeah, like they watch it with their morning cup of coffee.
And that's like, it's crazy brilliant to think of this intrinsic, extrinsic motivation that this site had, where it's like, you can get this, but if you upload more, you get more points. Like, it turned it into a literal game for these users.
Yeah.
And that's what's so crazy to me.
Yeah, I mean, it literally reminds me of that scene from The Office when Jim conditions Dwight. So every time he turns his computer off and it goes, he hands Dwight a mint. And then after like several days or weeks of that, he turns it off and then Dwight reaches over with his hand.
Yeah.
And Jim's like, what are you doing? And it's like, that's what they're doing, is it's literally behavioral modification.
Right.
It's grooming groomers to continue grooming.
Right.
It's how sick it is.
Well, and again, like, that's such a good point, because people who might have been like, I mean, this isn't really my thing, the gamification aspect of it probably is what kept them looping back for more.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like online gambling. You know what I mean? Like, with this like this reward system that they had going, like, it's like blowing my mind.
Yeah, and you guys think that blows your mind? Wait until we finish up in part 2. We're going to take you down a path that's even darker than this one. So stay tuned as the investigation goes deeper and the truth comes to light in ways no one could have possibly predicted.
So as always, guys, thanks for hanging out with us on this wild and crazy part 1 ride, and we'll catch you on the wild side.
Bye, guys.
Later, Gators. Hey, Wildside Tribe, don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Wildside Podcast. Make sure to tune in on Wildside Wednesdays. New episodes will drop each Wednesday at 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We would love to hear from you, so if you have a wild case recommendation, email us at wildsidepodcast@gmail.com. That's wildside with a C. Or share your thoughts in the comments below. As always, if you haven't heard it today, you're loved, you're worthy, and you're valuable. And we'll catch you on the flip side.